Another end of the season, which means another quiz day. I know some of our students will be starting school soon, or maybe you're already going, but hopefully you wouldn't have taken any tests yet, so consider this one a little teaser. You may not be getting a grade for Sunday school, but we're testing more than just your knowledge. We're testing your wisdom. So good luck! I know you've been faithfully following along, so get ready to put that work to the test.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
These 5 books are called the Pentateuch or Law.
And then Abraham, Sarah, Joseph, Moses, all the way up to the Joshua and to the land of Canaan. They also tell us how the Israelites loved God and then they disobeyed God. And then they loved Him. And then they disobeyed Him.
In these books of the Old Testament, people sacrificed animals as a way to show God that they were truly sorry for their sins. Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther.
These 12 books teach us about the history of Israel. The history in these books begins with Joshua crossed the Jordan River and headed to the Promised Land, about their life in the land of Canaan, and the time they were taken captive in Babylon. They also include the rebuilding of their important city, Jerusalem.
Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon.
Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentation, Ezekiel, and Daniel.
Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi.
The first 4 books of the New Testament are called the Gospel. Let's say these 4 books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they tell us about Jesus' life on earth.
Even though he was totally human, he never sinned. Because he was perfect, he could be the only person to take the punishment for our sin. Jesus died and shed his blood for us. Acts. After Jesus went to heaven, the church age began.
People who believe in Jesus gathered to encourage one another, pray for one another, worship together, and learn more about Jesus. Even though they were persecuted many times for their faith, they remained faithful to God.
Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, Philemon, Hebrews, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and Jude.
Revelation.
Question 1. What is your favorite part of the Bible?
Samson fell in love with a woman named Delilah. Although the Bible doesn't specifically say that Delilah was a Philistine, many people who study the Bible think she was. The Philistines were enemies of Israel.
It was wrong for Samson to have a relationship with Delilah because God wanted to use Samson to save Israel from Palestinians, not to be tricked by Palestine. It was sin.
Because they wanted to capture and torture Samson, the Philistine leader told Delilah that they would pay her a lot of money if she would find out what made Samson so strong.
Delilah started asking Samson to tell her what made him so strong.
Each of those 3 times, the Philistines would be waiting to capture him. But Samson's hair was still long, so he was strong and escaped each time. The 4th time, Delilah told Samson that if he loved her, he would tell her the true way to take away his strength. She nagged him so much that he finally told her the truth. If his head were shaved, he would become weak.
By then, Samson must have known that Delilah would trick him so he would be defeated. But he chose to stay with her and give in to her instead of obeying God and getting away from her. This was a sin.
Because of Samson's disobedience, the Philistines cut off Samson's hair. The consequence for Samson's disobedience was that he lost the strength God had given him.
The Palestinians captured Samson and blinded him. He was taken to prison and had to do hard work. It was the consequence of his sin. While living with the consequences of his disobedience, Samson's hair began to grow back. Instead, during a crowded celebration to Palestine's man-made god, Dagon, Samson was brought caught so they could make fun of him.
Samson understood that God was the source of his strength, but instead of repenting of his sins, Samson asked God to help him get revenge and kill the Philistines who were there together to worship their man-made god. Approximately 3,000 Philistines, including Samson, died that day.
Question 2. What did God want Samson to do?
An Israelite man named Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and his 2 sons moved to the land of Moab because there was food there. This wasn't good because the people of Moab were enemies of Israel, and they worshiped man-made gods.
While they were living in Moab, Elimelech died and left Naomi alone with her 2 sons. The 2 sons married Moabite woman, and 10 years later, the 2 sons died. Naomi was very sad because her husband and her sons were dead.
But then God helped the Israelites by giving them food, and Naomi decided to go back home. She told her daughter-in-law to stay in Moab. Her daughter-in-law, Ruth, loved Naomi, so she chose to go back to Israel with Naomi. Even though she wasn't an Israelite, she also chose to believe in the one true God.
When Naomi and Ruth returned to Israel, they needed food. Long ago, God had told the Israelite farmers to allow poor people to collect the leftover crops from the fields. Ruth told Naomi that she would go to someone's field to gather leftover grain for them to eat. Ruth ended up in the field of a man named Boaz.
Boaz was a man from Elimelech's family, so he was related to Naomi. Boaz had a special job to do. He was a kinsman redeemer. This meant that when his relative, Ruth's husband, passed away, it was his job to take care of the family.
Boaz obeyed God and took care of Ruth when she came to his field. He protected her and made sure that she had enough food. Naomi wanted Boaz and Ruth to get married. Boaz had heard how loving and loyal Ruth had been to Naomi.
Naomi had a special plan for Ruth, and Ruth chose to do exactly as her mother-in-law told her. She told Boaz that she wanted him to be her new husband and take care of her and Naomi. This made Boaz very happy. Boaz was obedient to God and followed all the rules he needed to follow to marry Ruth.
Boaz and Ruth got married. Then they had a baby boy. Listen to what Naomi's friends said to her about all that had happened.
Thanks to her loving daughter-in-law Ruth, Grandma Naomi received wonderful news. The people in the town told her, God has given you a precious grandson today. This child will become very famous in Israel.
Grandma Naomi held the baby close, filled with joy. The neighbors named the baby Obed. This Obed later became the grandfather of King David. Thanks to her dear Ruth, Grandma Naomi got such a precious grandson and found her smile again.
Boaz was a kinsman redeemer in his family. A kinsman redeemer is the person in a family that takes care of the relatives who are in some kind of trouble or are in hard times.
Although all 3 could have put themselves first, made very different choices, each was obedient to God and put others first. For that, they received God's blessings.
Question 3. Who was Boaz?
Hannah was ashamed because God had not given her a child. It was hard for Hannah not have a child. and she was very, very sad.
Every year, the Israelites went to a special place to worship God and make sacrifices. Before Jesus died on the cross, the Israelites made sacrifices to have their sins forgiven. Hannah's husband loved Hannah very much, even though she could not have children. He gave her double sacrifices to take to the temple.
Another woman was very mean to Hannah and made fun of her because she couldn't have a baby. Hannah was so upset that she cried and she wouldn't eat.
Elkanah thought Hannah should be happy just because he loved her and was good to her, but Hannah still wanted to have a baby.
Hannah got up, and while Eli, the priest, was sitting on his chair by the doorstep of the Lord's house, Hannah was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly.
Even though God had not given her a child, but instead Hannah didn't give up. She trusted in God by praying and crying out to Him for help. Hannah asked God for a baby boy, and she promised God that she would send him to the temple where he could serve God all his life.
The priest saw Hannah silently talking to God with her eyes closed and her lips moving, and he told her he thought she was drunk.
Hannah told the priest she wasn't drunk. She was praying to God from her heart and asking God to help her.
Hannah left, got something to eat, and was no longer sad because she went to God and asked Him for help. She had peace because she trusted in God.
Hannah could have been mad at God for her problem. She could have thought that God didn't love her, or she could have stopped trusting that He would take care of her.
Instead, she obeyed God and prayed to Him even when it was hard. She didn't lean on her own understanding. She leaned on God.
Hannah knew if she had a baby, the baby would come from God. Because her heart was right, she chose to give back to God what He would give to her.
God heard Hannah's prayer, and He remembered it. God blessed her with a son. God's plan for Hannah came true.
Hannah named her son Samuel, which means heard by God.
When Samuel was old enough, she took him to the temple to serve God, just as she had promised. Samuel became a priest.
He was Israel's last judge and an important prophet in the Promised Land. Samuel, the baby whom Hannah had prayed for, served God faithfully all his life.
Question 4. What did Hannah say she would do if God gave her a son?
When Samuel grew old, he wanted his sons to be judges, important leaders for Israel. However, Samuel's sons were not obedient like Samuel had been. The Israelites used Samuel's sons' bad behavior as an excuse to ask for a king. The next time the Philistines were about to go to war with Israel, Israel asked for a man to be their king and leader instead of God.
When Israel asked for a human king, this made Samuel very unhappy. So he went to God for help. God told Samuel to warn the Israelites about the terrible things that would happen. If they chose a man to be their king, God explained how Israel would lose their freedom and become slaves to a selfish ruler.
Samuel the prophet spoke to the people. Do you know what will happen if you have a king? He will take your sons to be soldiers, to plow his fields and to make his weapons. Your daughters will become cooks and bakers. The best of your fields and the vineyards will become his, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, even if you cry out in regret, the Lord will not listen. But the people stubbornly shouted back, No, we must have a king. We want our king to rule us and fight our battles just like all the other nations. Samuel, heartbroken, listened to all their words and then presented them to the Lord. The Lord replied, "Listen to them. Give them a king." And so Israel was granted the king they so desperately desired. But what consequences would this choice bring? There was a man named Saul. On the outside, he looked strong and handsome, just like what people think a king should look like. Saul was led by God to meet Samuel.
Before Saul and Samuel met, God spoke to Samuel and told him to anoint Saul to be the new leader of the Israelites.
This anointing meant that Saul would represent God to the people. This was very important because it was a reminder to the new king of the great responsibility he would have to lead the people by God's wisdom and not his own.
Saul wasn't sure that he could be a good leader. He even hid from the people for a little while. But Samuel announced to everyone that Saul was a new king, and the people shouted, "Long live the king!" Some people liked the new king and others didn't.
Although God had faithfully shown his power, love, and grace to Israel, they wanted a man to be their king so they could be like other nations.
Question 5. Who was Israel's first king?
Samuel told King Saul that God wanted him to take his army and totally destroy the Amalekites and all their animals.
Why was this so important? The Amalekites had such great sin in their camp. God did not want anything related to them to come near the Israelites. God was willing to protect and keep the Israelites safe because he loved them so much.
King Saul gathered Israel's army and attacked the Amalekites. But King Saul did not follow God's orders to destroy everything.
And his army allowed the Amalekite king Agag and the good livestock to live. God told Samuel about King Saul's sin, which was disobedience. This made Samuel very sad, and he cried out to God to find out what he should do.
King Saul set up a monument, which is like a statue, to himself. He was very prideful and completely disregarded God and gave him no glory for what he thought was a victory. Samuel talked to King Saul about his disobedience. King Saul was so prideful that he tried to convince Samuel that his disobedient behavior was actually something good and right.
King Saul tried again to make his disobedience sound like he was really doing something to honor God. He told Samuel that the good animals were kept just to give God sacrifices. Samuel told Saul that he could no longer be the king because he didn't obey God. This was a consequence of his sin. What is your consequence for sin?
Saul admitted he had sinned, and then he made another excuse for his disobedience by saying he was afraid of the Israelite people. But God tells us to obey him rather than man.
Samuel told Saul that God would not let him the king anymore, and God would not change his mind. God knew Saul wasn't sorry about his disobedience. He was just sorry about the consequences.
Saul showed he was not truly sorry when he begged Samuel to go back with him. He wouldn't look bad in front of all the Israelite people.
Samuel was sad about all that had happened, and he never saw Saul again. King Saul had a choice to make. He could have humbly obeyed God, or he could have been prideful and disobeyed. Sadly, King Saul was full of pride and chose to do things his way.
Question 6. Why did King Saul say he would let the good livestock live? Question 7. What decision did God make when King Saul did not obey him?
Do you remember Ruth and Boaz? Jesse was their grandson. How do you think Saul felt about a new king? Samuel was afraid to go to Bethlehem to anoint the new king because of Saul.
Samuel obeyed God and invited Jesse and his sons to the sacrifice.
Samuel thought Jesse's oldest son, Eliab, must be the new king because of his appearance.
God told Samuel not to think about how Jesse's son looked on the outside because God looks at a person's heart. Samuel was introduced to 7 of Jesse's sons, but God did not choose any of them.
Samuel found out that Jesse's youngest son, David, was out working and taking care of the family sheep. Samuel had the family bring David in from the field.
The Bible says that David also looked good on the outside. So why do you think God chose him? What made him different from his brothers?
Samuel anointed David in front of his family. That means he put oil on David as a symbol that God has chosen him and would protect him for his special calling.
David was most likely only a teenager at this time, if not younger. He would not take the throne of Israel until he was 30 because God was going to get him ready to be king.
David was a shepherd, a musician, a poet, and a brave warrior. God saw him and knew who he was from the inside out. God knew David would never turn away from him.
Question 8. Why did God choose David to be the next king of Israel? Question 9. Why did it take so long for David to become the new king?
Goliath was a mighty Palestinian soldier. He was a lot bigger and taller than other soldiers. He may have even been over 9 feet tall.
He had a heavy armor, a huge spear, a sword, and a shield bearer, which means someone else carried his heavy shield for him. For 40 days in a row, he came out to bully the Israelite army.
On the 40th day, David's father Jesse sent David to take food to his brothers and the Israelite army at the battlefield. When David arrived with the food, he heard Goliath shouting and bullying the Israelites.
Goliath terrified the whole Israelite army, including King Saul. No one would go out to fight him. They ran away.
King Saul even offered to give a lot of money and a wife to any man who would kill Goliath.
When David heard Goliath's bullying, he wasn't afraid.
David was confident and bold, and he trusted God.
The Israelite soldiers told David what King Saul would do for the man who killed Goliath. But David's oldest brother, Eliab, became very angry with David and accused him of being wicked. Then someone told King Saul what David had said about Goliath. Saul sent for David.
David told Saul that no one should be afraid. David volunteered to fight Goliath, but Saul said that David was too young. Listen to what David told Saul.
Where was David going to get the strength?
Saul gave David his armor to wear and his sword to fight with, but David didn't want them.
Who gave David the strength and skill to do this?
David was a young man who knew his strength would come from God. He wanted everyone to know his God was the one and only true God.
David knew no matter how huge and strong his problem was, no matter what armor and weapons he had, God would help him defeat the problem. David wanted to bring glory to God, and God gave David the strength to be the winner that day.
Question 10. Who was Goliath? Question 11. What did Goliath want to do? Question 12. Who fought Goliath and won? Wow! I bet you all did great. Give yourselves a pat on the back, a little handshake, and a little clap. It's been so great to follow along your lessons this summer, kids. I don't know about you, but I'm excited for the school year to start. I'm ready to keep learning. So as long as you're going to school, put the same effort into learning about the Bible, learning in church, and growing with God. Goodbye!